Princess Valera's antenna trembled as she watched the holographic recording for the 100th time. The human in the video was lifting a crashed shuttle off a trapped civilian, his muscles straining against what her scientists claimed was 3 times the weight any normal species could handle. But that wasn't what scared her. It was his face. He was smiling, showing his teeth while performing this impossible feat. "They smile when they fight," she whispered to herself, wrapping her protective wings tighter around her body. "They show their teeth when they're happy. How can any species be happy while fighting?" The door to her private chambers chimed softly. "Enter," she called out, quickly shutting off the hologram. Her mother's chief advisor, Coral, stepped into the room. His usual bright blue scales had turned a pale gray, a sure sign of distress. "Princess, the council has finished their meeting. The decision is final." Valera's second heart skipped a beat. "They can't be serious. Marrying me to a human, to Captain James Chen of the Terran Defense Force. It's our best option," Coral said softly. "The humans have pushed back our forces in 3 systems already. Their ships are slower than ours, their weapons less advanced, but they just keep coming. The last battle lasted 7 days. 7 days. Our soldiers needed sleep rotations, but the humans fought on with stimulants they call coffee and energy drinks." Valera pulled up another hologram, this one showing Captain Chen's military record. The image showed a human male with what her people considered a frighteningly symmetrical face. His skin was a shade they called tan, and his eyes had the strange white sclera all humans possessed, making them look like predators from the deep oceans of her homeworld. "Did you know," she said, her voice shaking, "that humans deliberately eat poison for pleasure? They call it spicy food. Their entertainment includes watching others pretend to fight and die. They expose themselves to dangerous radiation just to change the color of their skin." Coral nodded grimly. "And they can break their own bones and heal within weeks. Some of them voluntarily jump from high places with nothing but fabric to slow their fall. They call it parachuting. And that's who I'm supposed to marry." Valera's wings fluttered in distress, a creature that treats danger like entertainment. "The marriage will secure peace between our peoples," Coral said. "Captain Chen was chosen because he's one of their most decorated warriors. The humans say this shows their respect for our culture." Valera turned to her window, looking out at the 3 moons of her homeworld. "When do I meet him?" "There will be a video call tomorrow. The human diplomats insist it's their custom for arranged marriages to allow the couple to get to know each other." Valera shuddered. Another strange human concept, talking to learn about each other instead of simply exchanging biological and achievement data like civilized people. "Princess," Coral added hesitantly, "there's one more thing. The humans sent some cultural information they thought you should know. Captain Chen is what they call a gardener in history time." "What's a gardener?" "He deliberately grows dangerous plants for pleasure. Some of them are even toxic if consumed incorrectly. They call them vegetables and herbs." Valera sank into her resting couch, all 4 of her eyes wide with horror. "So he's not just a warrior, but someone who spends his leisure time cultivating poisons." As Coral left her chambers, Valera returned to watching the military footage. The human soldiers were carrying their wounded companions across battlefields, continuing to fight despite injuries that would have killed her people. They were smiling, always smiling, even in pain. Tomorrow she would face one of these creatures in a video call. And soon, she would have to marry one. Valera had never felt more terrified in her life. Valera's hands shook as she adjusted her formal robes for the 5th time. The communication screen in front of her remained black, counting down the minutes until her first video call with Captain James Chen. Her attendants had spent hours making sure she looked perfect, though she wondered if human eyes could even appreciate the subtle patterns in her scale coloring. 10 seconds, Your Highness," a technician announced. She straightened her posture, trying to remember everything she'd learned about human diplomatic protocols. "Don't show fear. They can smell it. Don't blink all four eyes at once. It might trigger their hunting instincts. And most importantly, don't show any sign of weakness. The screen flickered to life, and Valera had to stop herself from flinching. Princess Valera, I'm James Chen. It's an honor to meet you. His voice was soft, nothing like the battlefield recordings where humans roared their war cries. Captain Chen sat in what appeared to be a personal office, wearing what humans called a formal uniform. He wasn't showing his teeth, and his expression seemed almost gentle. Greetings, Captain Chen, she managed to say, proud that her voice didn't tremble. I trust you are well. He smiled then, but it was small, controlled, like he knew their teeth frightened other species. I am, thank you. I hope this isn't too awkward. I know arranged marriages aren't common in Earth culture anymore, but I want you to know I'm committed to making this work for both our peoples. Valera was about to respond when something caught her eye in the background of his video feed. Are those weapons mounted on your wall? Chen turned, then laughed, a sound that made her antenna twitch. Oh, they're just training swords. I practice traditional Earth martial arts. It's more of an art form now, really. A way to maintain discipline and focus. You fight for relaxation. It's more like dancing, actually. Would you like to see? Before she could protest, Chen stood and moved to an open space in his office. What followed both terrified and fascinated her. His movements were fluid, controlled, nothing like the brutal combat she'd seen in the war footage. It was almost beautiful in a deadly sort of way. That was a basic kata, he explained, sitting back down. It helps center the mind. Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent beeping from Chen's desk. His face turned serious as he read something on another screen. I apologize, Princess, but I need to attend to something. Would you mind if I showed you what a typical day in my duties looks like? It might help you understand more about me. Valera agreed, more out of shock at his politeness than actual desire. The video feed switched to what appeared to be a training exercise. What she saw next made her all four eyes widen in horror. Chen was leading his troops through what humans called an obstacle course. They crawled through mud, climbed walls 3 times their height, and jumped into deep water with full equipment. When one soldier struggled, Chen went back, encouraging them, helping them through, all while carrying extra weight himself. Their bodies should have given up hours ago, Valera whispered to her attendant. Humans call it pushing their limits, the attendant whispered back. They do it voluntarily. The feed switched back to Chen's office. He was covered in sweat and mud but seemed completely unbothered. Sorry about that. It's important to train with the troops, not just command them. Valera stared at him, this creature who could switch from graceful martial arts to brutal training to polite conversation as easily as she changed robes. Same time tomorrow, he asked, still being impossibly gentle despite everything she just witnessed. Yes, she found herself saying, fascinated and terrified in equal measure. Tomorrow. After the call ended, Valera sat in silence for a long time. The human was nothing like she expected, and that somehow made him even more frightening. How could something be so contradictory and still exist? She had a feeling sleep would not come easily tonight. The royal transport ship Starlight Blessing glided smoothly through space, its crystalline engines humming with power. Valera stood at the observation deck, watching the stars streak by. In 3 hours, they would reach the neutral space station, where her marriage to Captain Chen would take place. Your Highness, Coral approached her, tablet in hand. Captain Chen's ship is maintaining escort position at the recommended safe distance. Valera looked out at the human vessel. It was ugly by her people's standards, all sharp angles and metal, nothing like the flowing crystal and light of their own ships. But she had learned that humans often chose function over beauty. Has he sent any more messages? She asked, trying to sound casual. Just routine status updates and... Coral was cut off by a sudden violent shaking of the ship. Red warning lights flashed across the deck. Valara grabbed a support rail as the artificial gravity flickered. Report. Engine failure, someone shouted. The crystal matrix is destabilizing. We're losing power to all systems. Valera's hearts raced. Without power, they would drift in space until their air ran out. The backup systems should have activated, but nothing was responding. Then her antenna picked up a transmission. Starlight Blessing. This is Captain Chen. We're picking up major power fluctuations from your ship. Do you need assistance? Before anyone could respond, a second shockwave ripped through the ship. Valara watched in horror as cracks appeared in the observation window. Their ships weren't built for emergencies. Her people believed in prevention rather than crisis management. Your Highness, Coral shouted. The human ship is approaching. They're ignoring safety protocols. Valara watched as Chen's vessel, the Terra Nova, moved alongside them. It was shocking to see it up close, scarred from battles, reinforced with extra plating, built like the warrior species that created it. All crew, brace for emergency docking. Chen's voice came through again. We're reading hull breaches on your port side. We're coming to get you out. What happened next would stay in Valara's memory forever. Human crew members in heavy suits cut through the sealed doors between their ships. They moved with incredible speed, ignoring the difference in atmosphere and gravity between the vessels. Then she saw him in person for the first time. Captain Chen, wearing what looked like powered armor, carrying two of her injured crew members, each weighing more than a human should be able to lift. Princess, he called out, his voice muffled through his helmet. We need to move now. Your engine core is going critical. She stood frozen, watching as more humans rushed past her, helping her people. One of them was giving medicine to an injured crew member. Another was carrying a child from the diplomatic family section. Valara. Chen called again, this time right in front of her. I know you're scared, but right now I need you to trust me. His helmet was transparent enough that she could see his face. There was no smile now, no gentleness, just pure focus. Without waiting for her response, he picked her up as if she weighed nothing. Hold on, he said, and started running through the corridors. They made it to his ship just as another explosion rocked the Starlight Blessing. Through a viewing window, Valara watched her beautiful vessel break apart, its crystal engines shattering into space. Later, in the Terra Nova's medical bay, she found Chen treating his own burns, injuries he had gotten going back for the last crew members. I apologize for handling you without permission, Princess, he said, wincing as he applied some kind of cream to his wounds. It was the fastest way to ensure your safety. Valara stared at him, this human who had risked his life to save her people, who had burned his own skin to rescue strangers, who was now acting like this was all just a normal day's work. Thank you, she whispered, and for the first time, she didn't feel fear when he smiled back. The neutral space station, Unity Point, wasn't what Valara expected. Instead of the sterile, purely functional environment she had imagined, the station was filled with life. Actual plants grew in hydroponic gardens along the corridors, and the air smelled of something the humans called coffee. These are our community gardens, Captain Chen explained as he showed her around. His burns from the rescue were already healing, far faster than her people would recover. Every crew member can grow something here if they want. Valara watched a young human child helping her mother tend to some plants. You let your young ones handle living organisms. Chen smiled. Of course, it teaches them responsibility. Would you like to see my personal garden? Before she could politely decline, he led her to a small room filled with tiny trees. They were smaller than her hand, growing in shallow dishes. These are bonsai trees, Chen explained, gently touching one of the miniature branches. It's an ancient earth art form. Each tree takes years of careful pruning and shaping. You make the trees smaller on purpose. Valera's antenna twitched in confusion. Why not let them grow naturally? It's about finding beauty in patience and control. Chen picked up tiny scissors. Would you like to try? Valara backed away. I couldn't. We believe interfering with plant growth is wrong. Ah. Chen put down the scissors. Like how we probably seem wrong to you in many ways. His directness startled her. On her world, such things would never be spoken openly. But she was learning that humans valued what they called honest communication. Their tour continued to the station's recreation area, where Valera witnessed more bewildering human behaviors. Some humans were lifting heavy objects repeatedly for no apparent reason. Others were hitting padded bags with their fists. In one corner, a group moved in sync to loud rhythmic sounds. "What are they doing?" she asked, pointing to the synchronized group. "Dancing. It's how we express joy through movement. But they're all moving differently while following the same pattern. That's impossible." Chen laughed. Humans are good at being different while still working together. Like how every garden plant is unique, but they all grow together. He paused, looking at her carefully. Like how two different species might find a way to build a future together. Valera felt her scales flush with color. An embarrassing display of emotion she couldn't control. To her surprise, Chen politely looked away, giving her time to compose herself. They passed the station's school, where human and alien children learned together. Valera watched in shock as a human teacher encouraged the students to ask questions, to challenge ideas, to make mistakes, and learn from them. "In our schools," she said quietly, "students only listen and memorize. This seems chaotic." "Chaos isn't always bad," Chen replied. "Sometimes the best discoveries come from unexpected places." At the end of their tour, they stopped at something called a coffee shop. Chen ordered 2 drinks, one safe for her biology. "I know we must seem scary to your people," he said, wrapping his burned hands around his hot drink. "We fight hard. We feel deeply. We do dangerous things for fun. But everything you've seen today, the gardens, the dancing, the teaching, that's what we fight to protect." Valera looked around the station. She saw humans teaching alien children how to plant seeds. She saw them sharing their strange drinks with other species. She saw them treating the chaos of life not as something to be controlled, but as something to be celebrated. "Perhaps," she said slowly, taking a sip of her own drink, "there are some things about humans I still need to learn." Chen smiled, and for the first time, the sight of his teeth didn't make her want to run away. "We have time," he said simply. "Growth, like my bonsai trees, cannot be rushed." The alarm started during dinner. Valera was trying her first mild human food, something called pasta, when the station's lights turned red and sirens began wailing. "Security breach in docking bay 3, a computerized voice announced. "Unknown armed individuals have entered the station." Chen's transformation was instant. The gentleman who had been teaching her about Earth food disappeared, replaced by the warrior she'd first feared. But now, watching him snap into action, she saw something different in his efficiency. "All civilians to safe rooms," he ordered into his communicator. "Security teams to defensive positions. Priority is protecting the civilians." "The wedding guests," Valera said, her antenna vibrating with worry. "Many of my people are here." "They'll be safe," Chen promised. "Please go with the evacuation team." "I'm staying with you." The words surprised them both. Before Chen could argue, the first sounds of fighting reached them. Through the corridor windows, they saw a group of masked figures moving towards the school area. "They're heading for the children," Chen said, his voice hard. But instead of charging in, he pressed a button on his communicator. "This is Captain Chen to hostile forces. The station is under military protection. Surrender now, and you will be treated fairly." Valera stared at him. "You're offering them a chance to give up." "Always. Fighting is the last option, not the first." The only response was weapons fire. Chen sighed, then spoke into his communicator again. "All units, non-lethal tactics only. These people might be scared, angry, or manipulated. We subdue them, but we don't become them." What followed showed Valera yet another side of humans. The station's security forces, led by Chen, moved with incredible coordination. They used sound devices to disorient the attackers, nets to trap them, and when they had to fight hand-to-hand, they used restraining holds instead of lethal strikes. Chen himself seemed to be everywhere at once. He pulled injured civilians to safety, directed defense teams, and still found time to check on the evacuees. Valera watched him talk down one attacker who, overwhelmed by the humans' unexpected mercy, surrendered and revealed vital information about the others. "They're extremists," Chen told her during a brief quiet moment. "People who don't want our species to unite. They thought attacking during the wedding preparations would prove humans are too dangerous to ally with. They're proving the opposite," Valera said, watching human medics treat injured attackers with the same care as injured civilians. The crisis ended not with a dramatic battle, but with Chen talking to the remaining attackers through a door they'd barricaded themselves behind. "Your friends are safe," he told them. "No one has been killed. You can still walk away from this with your honor, if not your freedom. Sometimes the bravest thing is admitting we were wrong." When they finally surrendered, Valera saw tears in some of their eyes. They were her people, young ones who had been fed stories about human brutality, just as she had been. Later, as the station returned to normal, Valera found Chen in his garden, tending to a bonsai tree that had been knocked over in the chaos. "You could have killed them all," she said. "It would have been faster, easier." "Easier isn't always better." He gently lifted the small tree. Like these trees, people need patience and understanding to grow properly. Violence only creates more violence. "When I first learned I had to marry you, I thought humans were ruthless warriors," Valera admitted. "Now I see that your true strength isn't in your ability to fight, but in your choice not to." Chen smiled, and Valera realized she was beginning to find that smile comforting rather than frightening. "Tomorrow," he said, carefully straightening the little tree's branches, "would you like to learn how to help me tend the garden?" This time, Valera didn't hesitate to say yes. The day after the attack, Valera found herself in Chen's garden room, staring nervously at a small pair of pruning scissors. The bonsai tree in front of her seemed impossibly delicate. "I'll ruin it," she said, her antenna drooping. "You won't," Chen assured her. "Here, let me show you." He stood behind her, carefully guiding her hands. Gentle but firm. Like everything else, it's about finding balance. As they worked together, Valera noticed the burns on his hands from the rescue days ago were almost completely healed. "How do humans recover so quickly?" "We evolved that way," Chen explained, helping her trim a tiny branch. "Our ancestors had to keep hunting even when injured, so our bodies adapted." "Is that why you're so persistent?" Chen laughed softly. "Probably. We're not the strongest species, or the fastest, but we never learned when to quit." He paused, looking at her carefully. "That scares people sometimes." "It scared me," Valera admitted. "We saw videos of humans continuing to fight with broken bones, running on damaged legs, smiling through pain. We thought you were monsters. And now?" Valera looked at the small tree they were tending. "Now I think perhaps we misunderstood. You don't fight because you love violence. You fight because you love other things more." A group of children ran past the garden room's window, a mix of human and alien young ones playing together. Some of them waved at Chen, who waved back with a gentle smile. "Yesterday," Valera said, "you could have killed those attackers. Your strength would have made it easy, but you chose a harder path to save them." "Violence is easy," Chen agreed, adjusting a wire supporting one of the tree's branches. "Peace is harder. It takes more strength to show mercy than to punch someone." Valera put down the scissors, turning to face him. "When did you learn to be gentle? Your records show you fought in many battles." "I learned it from these." He gestured to the bonsai trees. "After my first combat mission, I was angry, aggressive. A friend suggested I try bonsai. said I needed to learn that strength without control is just destruction. He picked up a watering can, showing her how to give the tree just enough water. Too much force kills the tree, too little, and it can't grow. Like relationships between people or between species. Valera watched a drop of water roll down a tiny leaf. On my world, we're taught that strength and gentleness can't exist together, that they're opposites. Look at this tree, Chen said. It's strong enough to survive centuries, yet gentle enough to be shaped by a careful hand. Why can't people be the same? A comfortable silence fell as they continued working on the tree. Valera found herself relaxing, letting Chen teach her the careful art of nurturing something while also guiding its growth. Sometimes, Chen said quietly, I think the universe made humans look scary to other species as a test, to see if they could look past appearances and find what's underneath. And what is underneath? Valera asked. Chen gently turned a branch toward the light. The same thing that's in every species, the desire to grow, to protect, to make things better than we found them. Valera looked at his hands, hands that could break bones and lift impossible weights, now delicately adjusting leaves smaller than her fingertip. I think, she said slowly, I'm starting to understand humans better. She paused, then added, and maybe one human in particular. Chen smiled, and Valera realized she was smiling too, a gesture she had learned from watching him. The ceremony is in 3 days, he said. Are you still scared? Valera looked at the tiny tree they had tended together, at the careful balance of strength and gentleness it represented. No, she said truthfully. Now I'm curious. Valera couldn't sleep. With only 2 days until the ceremony, she found herself wandering the station's historical archives. The room was filled with data crystals containing records from various species, including her own people's ancient history. I thought I might find you here. Chen's voice came from the doorway. He was holding 2 cups of what he called chamomile tea, a drink he claimed helped humans relax. I couldn't sleep, she admitted, accepting one of the cups. I was reading about my ancestors. Find anything interesting? Valera's antenna twitched with excitement. Actually, yes. Look at this. She activated a data crystal, projecting images of her species from thousands of years ago. The beings in the images looked different, stronger, less delicate. These are your ancestors? Chen asked, studying the images with interest. Yes, and look at this. She switched to another image, showing ancient members of her species climbing mountains, swimming in deep waters, fighting large predators. We were more like humans. Chen sat down beside her, careful not to spill his tea. What changed? According to these records, our scientists decided to improve our species. They thought our adaptability was inefficient, that specialization would make us better. Valera's voice trembled slightly. They engineered us to be more civilized, less aggressive, more specialized for intellectual tasks. They tried to remove the parts of you they thought were primitive, Chen said softly. Yes, they made us better by making us less. Valera stared at an image of her ancestors building shelters with their bare hands. We gained intelligence, but we lost something too. The ability to adapt, to fight, to. She hesitated, to feel deeply. Chen was quiet for a moment, sipping his tea. Do you think that's why humans frighten your people so much? Because we remind you of what you used to be. I think so. Valera projected another image, this one showing ancient celebration rituals that looked surprisingly similar to human dances. We used to dance too. We used to show our teeth when happy. We used to fight to protect what we loved. Used to. Over generations, those traits were bred out. Fighting was seen as primitive. Strong emotions were considered uncivilized. Even our bodies became more fragile as we focused on developing our minds. Chen gently touched one of the projected images. But some things can't be completely engineered away, can they? You still feel emotions. You still care about things worth protecting. Valera thought about how she'd felt during the attack, wanting to stay and help. Maybe those traits aren't gone. Maybe they're just sleeping, like seeds waiting for the right time to grow. Chen smiled, using one of his gardening metaphors that she'd come to appreciate. Yes, Valera switched off the projector, turning to face him. Humans remind us of everything we tried to forget about ourselves. Your strength, your emotions, your ability to be both gentle and fierce. We had all of that once. And now? Now I think perhaps we were wrong. True civilization isn't about removing the parts of ourselves we fear. It's about learning to balance them, like you do. Chen reached out slowly, giving her time to move away if she wanted, and touched her hand. Balance is hard. That's why it's worth working for. Valera looked at their joined hands, his built for endurance and strength, hers evolved for delicate technical work. Different, but somehow fitting together. The ceremony, she said suddenly. I want to change it. Oh, yes. Instead of following only modern protocols, I want to include some of these ancient traditions, to remind my people of who we used to be, who we might be again. Chen smiled, and now she could see in it what her ancestors might have seen, not the threat display she'd first feared, but an expression of joy and hope. I think, he said, squeezing her hand gently, that's a wonderful idea. The day of the ceremony arrived with unexpected color and energy. Valera had insisted on holding it in the station's largest garden dome, where human and alien plants grew together in carefully maintained harmony. Are you sure about this? Coral asked nervously, watching as Valera put on a ceremonial dress that combined modern and ancient styles. Some of the council members are already uncomfortable with the changes. They'll understand when they see it, Valera said, adjusting the dress's flowing lines. She had designed it herself, incorporating patterns from the historical archives. Patterns that showed strength could be beautiful. In another part of the station, Chen was also preparing. He wore his formal military uniform, but had added traditional elements from Valera's ancient culture that she had shared with him. His bonsai trees had been moved to the ceremony space, their small forms representing the balance both species were trying to achieve. When the music started, it wasn't the usual formal tones of modern ceremonies. Instead, it combined human instruments with recreated sounds from Valera's ancestors' celebrations. The melody spoke of both power and grace. Valera entered the garden dome, and for the first time in her species' recent history, a bride smiled openly, showing her teeth in joy. Some of the older council members gasped, but then something remarkable happened. A group of children, human and alien mixed together, started dancing in the traditional style Valera had discovered in the archives. Their movements were both strong and elegant, reminding everyone watching that beauty could exist in many forms. Chen waited for her by a small arch covered in both earth flowers and crystal growths from her homeworld. His smile matched hers, and now everyone could see how similar those expressions really were. Today, Valera began, speaking to the gathered crowd. We celebrate more than a union between two people. We celebrate the recognition that strength and gentleness are not opposites, but partners in the dance of life. Chen took her hand, and together they performed a ceremony that honored both their cultures. They exchanged vows in multiple languages. They shared symbolic foods, carefully chosen to be safe for both species. They even demonstrated the ceremonial garden tending, working together to plant a new tree that combined species from both their worlds. Look at them, one young alien whispered to another. They move like the ancient ones did. Indeed, Valera found herself moving with more confidence, her body remembering things her ancestors had known. And Chen, despite his strength, handled everything with careful precision that showed true power. The most surprising moment came during the traditional blessings. Instead of the usual formal statements, Valera's people began sharing stories. Stories of their own hidden strengths, of times they had felt the ancient courage stirring in their hearts. Perhaps One elder said, watching Chen help Valera tend their newly planted tree, "We have been too quick to judge strength as primitive." And perhaps, another added, seeing how gently the human warrior handled the delicate task, "We have misunderstood what strength truly means." The ceremony ended with a dance, a real dance, like both species used to perform. Valera and Chen led it, showing everyone that grace and power could move as one. Later, as the celebrations continued around them, they stood in a quiet corner of the garden, looking at their planted tree. "Your people are smiling more," Chen observed. "Really smiling, not just being polite." "They're remembering," Valera said, touching the tree's leaves. "Remembering that being strong doesn't mean being cruel, and being gentle doesn't mean being weak. Like humans," Chen teased gently. "Like all of us could be." Valera looked at their joined hands again. "This isn't just a marriage, is it? It's a beginning." Chen smiled, and now she saw in it everything she once feared and everything she had grown to love. Strength and kindness, power and gentleness, all in perfect balance. "Yes," he said simply, "a beginning." And around them, in the garden where earth plants and alien crystals grew side by side, their new tree reached toward the stars.